Our IIA live online session today will be presented by Andrew Brown. As an experienced executive coach and facilitator, his passion is supporting people to liberate their inherent wisdom and compassion in service of the lives they wish to lead. Andrew has held executive positions across the Asia-Pacific region. He's been a regular columnist on leadership in the magazines for several years and has co-developed models in diagnostics relating to organizations' maturity. He has also recently co-written a series of papers on risk maturity and financial leadership. Okay, well that's all from me. Andrew, I'm just opening up your mic there and handing control over to you.
Okay, thank you, Linda, and welcome everyone. I'd also like to just thank the IIA for hosting this event today. To give a little context to how this webinar came about, Dave Mallard and I have been partnering with the Institute of Internal Auditors in the last 2 years, running a 2-day program called The Effective Auditor, Understanding and Applying Soft Skills. David's background is in internal audit and has done chief audit roles and a variety of other very relevant roles. My background has been in chief financial officer roles, chief actuary roles, and very much a customer of and partner of the auditor. So David and I bring those two parts together. The program has received some great feedback to the extent that the IIA have asked us to share some of the key themes, and that's really what the webinar today is going to explore. And really, the key themes for me around power, trust and influence are very much around people's individual leadership styles. And I don't mean leadership as a position of authority in an organisation. I mean the traits which everyone brings to determine how influential they are in their roles and how effective they are. So we will explore these themes as we go through. I'd invite people, any questions you have, please put them into the chat box as we go along, and we'll either answer them at the time, or if there's an appropriate spot later on, I'll answer them again. So let's explore the first trait, which is trust. There are many attributes of an effective auditor, many aspects which are really important to leadership. But trust and being trustworthy is a central attribute. There are challenges, though, around building trust. It takes years to build trust and a few seconds to destroy it. Trust is a risk because when we trust others, we open ourselves up to the possibility of being taken advantage of. This causes a dilemma. If we want first for others to trust us, it can take a long time to build trust. What is our role in building a trusting relationship with the people that we work with? To explore the notion of trust in a little bit more depth, I'm going to invite you just to reflect for a couple of minutes to consider what are the attributes of a person that you can trust. And in context of internal audit, it might be someone who you have a business relationship with, and what are the attributes of that person which mean that you can connect with them and trust them at a deeper level. To give you an example of a person I trust, it was a mentor and a manager that I had in the late 1990s when I was working in a very volatile and politically charged environment. And I used to have many conversations with my manager/mentor. And he had this incredible capacity just to sit and to listen to what I was saying without judging, sometimes to challenge my thoughts as we went through, but to hold that space where he was able to listen to me and acknowledge what I was feeling. So for me, the core attribute there would be trust, would be listening and care. So I'm going to invite you, please, in your chat box, in the next minute or two, write an attribute of a person that you trust. open, someone who walks the talk, integrity, honesty, loyalty, takes agreed actions, honest and reliable, transparent, consistent, practice what they preach, credibility, someone who do not judge what you tell them. All of the above: respect, reliability, transparency, non-judgmental, keeping sensitive information sensitive, actions match words, honest and loyal, has my back, listens and understands, respect. Supports through difficult decisions and times. Very, very, very powerful attributes. Thank you everyone for contributing. As you can see, there are many, many consistent themes there. Let's explore some research from a gentleman called Stephen Covey. People may have heard of Stephen Covey. He wrote a very famous book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. There's also a book he wrote called The Speed of Trust. And in The Speed of Trust, he explored and researched what was it that led to people building high trust in relationships. And these are the following attributes. There were 13 that he discovered. Keeping commitments, extending trust to others, listening first, creating transparency, clarifying our expectations, confronting reality, practicing accountability, righting wrongs, continuous improvement, owning up to our area for development, demonstrating respect to others, delivery of results, showing loyalty, straight talk. You did very, very well as a group. I think we covered just about every one of those points. One that I'd like just to explore a little bit is the extending trust. To me, trust is a system. If you want for people to trust you, very often we need to be the first to extend trust. It's a little bit like meeting someone for the first time and being really interested in that person. Who's going to take the first step? If neither party does, then you won't go out for dinner. For trust to work, someone needs to take the first step. So very often, if we're going to invite other people into a relationship, if we're going to build a deeper relationship of trust, we have to extend that trust. When I said before it's a little bit like a system, what that means is when we withdraw trust, how do people respond? The more we withdraw trust, the less the people feel trusted, the less likely they are to trust us. I like to think of each of the attributes of power, trust and influencing as having a mindset that sits behind it. And for me, around extending trust, one of the mindsets is every behaviour has a positive intention. You might be sitting there thinking, what does he mean that every behaviour has a positive intention? I've seen people do some very, very bad things. Well, sometimes people's positive intentions aren't necessarily towards you, they aren't necessarily towards the external world. Sometimes the positive intentions are towards themselves. But what we need to open up at first, if there's a problem or an issue, is to explore what that person's positive intention might have been. And by doing that, it opens up the possibility that there may be more information that we haven't considered. To bring this to life, I'll share an example from a motor car release in the mid-1990s. And this is a very famous and true situation where a new car was released by a major manufacturer. And what happened when the car was released is it sold very, very quickly, and there was a really significant increase in profit for a short period of time. Unfortunately, after about 4 to 6 months, many of the cars were being recalled. And they're being recalled because the tyres on the cars were wearing very rapidly. And there was a team that was put together to explore why the tyres were wearing so quickly. And what they found is that the nuts that were fitted to the tyres were not the exact fit. on the ones that are being recalled, and they're out by just a microcosm, just a very small amount that it's almost impossible to see with the eye, that an expert who designed the nuts would be able to tell. They went back to the part of the factory which was assembling the cars, and they asked the person in charge there if they understood what might have been happening with these nuts. And the person thought about it for a minute, and they realised, and they said, oh, we were asked by the company to save $10,000 a year. And one of our saving initiatives was there was a whole heap of nuts left over from the previous car release, and they looked exactly the same, so we used those on the new cars. So here was a part of the business acting with a positive intention to save the business $10,000, but unfortunately, by having that positive intention, there was a second-order effect or a second-order consequence. So that every behaviour has a positive intention is not assuming that people do things maliciously or badly or wrongly, but that when people do things, there are sometimes unintended consequences or things that they haven't considered. How is our role there to explore that? And that is an extension of trust. To explore trust a little bit more and to bring together Covey's research into a framework, there's also some research from a book called The Trusted Advisor by David Meister, Charles Green and Robert Galford. And it brings the elements of trust together into an equation. And the trust equation is intimacy plus credibility plus reliability divided by self-serving. Intimacy, the ability to create a personal connection. Credibility, skilled, knowledgeable, genuine. Reliability, someone who's reliable, follows through. They do what they say they will. Self-serving, acting with little or no regard for the need of others. So if you went back to the trust wheel on the 13 attributes from Covey, you would find that each of these would fit into intimacy, credibility, or reliability. However, what the trust equation is introducing is not only are there attributes which build trust, but sometimes there are attributes which reduce trust, such as being self-serving. So let's explore this a little bit, and I'm going to invite you to reflect on how would a client, a difficult client that you have, rate you on a scale of 1 to 3, where on the low, medium, high on each of these areas. So for example, if the client said you have great personal connection and they really appreciate that, they would rate you potentially a 3 for intimacy. However, if they said, look, we're not sure how well you know our business, and sometimes we don't really understand how the advice you're doing is supporting us, then they might rate you a 1 or a 2 on credibility. When it comes to self-serving, how are you acting in regard to their needs? How are you both ensuring that the role that you play as an auditor is upholding the needs of the audit function, but at the same time is understanding what the needs of the client are? So let's explore this, and I'm going to invite you to calculate your own trust equation. The highest possible score is 9. That would be a 3 on intimacy, a 3 on credibility, a 3 on reliability, and a 1 on self-serving. The lowest score is a third, not 1 as it says on the page, but 1/3. 1 for intimacy, 1 for credibility, 1 for reliability, and it would be 3 for self-serving. Now, what did you score and what is your insight? I'm just going to give you a minute or two just to reflect on that, and just feel whatever information you're comfortable to put up, please do. So some people might want to put up their score, some might just want to put up their insight. And then we'll explore that in a little bit more depth because we have a poll to get us into that. Great question from Margaret. How do you deal with someone who seems to take an instant dislike to you and it seems nothing you can do to break this down? If I was in that situation, I would be firstly trying to understand a little bit more about that person, how they operate and what is important to them. Given they've taken an instant disliking to me, it may be that I can't find that information out from them. So I would seek other people who've worked with that person in the past, and I would seek an understanding of what those person's hot buttons are, what their concerns are. if there is someone who's previously been in a relationship from an audit perspective, I would seek that person's advice as well. The second thing I would do is if there's no additional information, anything that comes up, I might actually say to that person, I feel in the relationship here that I'm not quite sure how you're experiencing how we're working together, and I really want to make sure that we can work together effectively. Can you provide me some feedback on what's going to work for you? So rather than trying to influence straight away or putting my view on the table, I'm just going to try to gently provoke them to share some more information with me. So let me just pause because people are starting to put up some comments, and Margaret, we'll come back to that question in a little bit more depth later on. But I hope that as a starting point starts to explore some alternatives. Okay, great. So some lovely insights here. Sometimes it's challenging to get close to the clients. Sometimes an insight clients may not feel you fully understand their business and challenges to provide valuable recommendations. And at the same time, we do need to keep our independence. So how do we both be independent and at the same time collaborative? Really interesting question. Okay. Always try to see things from their point of view. Great. How do you deal with an outsourced provider whose needs are different from the needs of the organisation you represent when assessing self-serving score? So there's a question that I would ask there when I'm working with people, and it's always, how do you come back to aligned needs? And yes, there will be different shareholders, and each of the shareholders might have a competitive need, but how do you actually try to find what's something that both parties want? And for most part, both parties normally in any kind of deal, they both want something that adds value. Very often one party will have something that might be of more value to the other party. The other party might have something of more value to this party. When you start going down that route of identifying what is valuable to each, you start opening up a different conversation. You start opening up a conversation which is exploring values and exploring what is similar rather than where we are different. So that would be, again, Karen, that would be my starting point for that. Can I ask Linda, please, would you be able to put up the poll now so we can explore this in a little bit more depth?
Okay, that's up on everyone's screen there. Guys, now just select your answer and hit submit for us, and I'll give you an update shortly there, Andrew.
Thanks, Linda.
Andrew, just to give you a quick update, we've gotten over 80 responses there. There's still 18 people that have not started the poll, but if you guys are going to participate in it, please select your answer and hit submit for us. How much longer did you want to leave this poll open for, Andrew?
Another 23 seconds, Linda.
No problems. We'll do. And I'll close off the poll in about 20 seconds and I'll display the results shortly.
Right, great. Karen, did that answer your question about how you deal with outsourced providers whose needs are different? Okay, what else would you like to know on that? Okay. Just while we're there's a couple of questions that come up, one from Jess and one from Karen and the previous question, I want to drill down to those and explore those and also get the perspective from people on the poll on how they deal with these challenges. Let's just have a look at the poll results first around trust. What do we notice here? We notice that credibility and reliability tends to be very strong strengths. Intimacy and self-interest tend to be much lower. When I look at the work that Dave and I have done with the internal audit program and the program around effective audit, I think the findings on that program would be very consistent. Many people are valued for their reliability, they follow through in the credibility, but it's very challenging on building effective relationships with people and not coming across as self-serving when people are being audited. So that to me makes perfect sense in the context of the research that we've seen and the other conversations we've seen. Linda, rather than doing the second poll, I think we'll just do the one poll for today because I think this gives us enough insight to go forward.
All right, no problems. Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I want to just explore first, there's 2 or 3 open questions, and I'd like to explore these before we move into the next section, which will start to explore power in a little bit more depth. Karen has raised a question, what happens when you don't trust your partner, when you don't trust another party? Now, there are a number of pieces there. For me, I always think that with trust, there's also discernment. And if I naively trust someone without having any kind of level of discernment, I definitely open myself up to be manipulated and taken advantage of. A very simple example would be I have a 15-year-old daughter. If I gave the keys to my car to my 15-year-old daughter and said, darling, I trust you can drive the car, that would not be a very discerning approach. It would be a rather naive approach with someone who I'm placing trust in who hasn't yet built the skills or have the competency to do that. So we need to be very mindful that with trust, there's also discernment. My second comment then is, if we start from a position of not trusting the other party, we need to understand why is it that we don't trust them. So let's explore that. Is it that you don't trust them because they have done something untrustworthy in the past? Is it that you don't trust them because by nature they're a separate entity and historically that's how you viewed separate entities, or that's people's beliefs around how companies work together? Each of those is very, very different pathway. If the first pathway is someone has done something that has broken my trust, then the first thing that needs to happen is to have a conversation with that party to explain what your concerns are. Now, I will call this a conversation, honest conversation of advocacy and inquiry. These are things that Dave and I explore in the 2-day program, and it will be around sharing with that person from your perspective and your observations what they did, what the consequences were of that action, and how that made you feel. We then ask them to get from their perspective what was their intention behind it, what are their thoughts about how you've made the decisions that you've made, what you might be missing. So by inviting them to also respond is itself an extension of trust. So a long answer, Karen, but what it comes down to me is as a process, if we don't trust someone and if they've done something in the past that leads to that distrust, the only way, there are a number of ways forward, but one of the most effective ways forward is to have the conversation with them to see how to resolve that. If you're going into a relationship in the first place that there's very low trust, I would question why you're going into that relationship, and I would question about the relationship with providers. How do you partner with people and set up the relationships up front, which is about a genuine positive outcome for both parties? Now, it's sometimes called a win-win, and to me that's not about both parties compromising. It's about what is the third way where both your view and my view are held. How do I make sure that my values are intact and what I want to get out of the relationship is intact? What you want to get out of the relationship is intact, but how do we do that in a way that preserves both of them? Let's explore. Jess Potter made a comment. The challenge for me in my organisation is the internal audit function is seen as a needs to be there. We're not seen as being able to provide value. We're working on this through establishing risk workshops where we can. We're a global company, so this is another challenge, to understand what each of our business needs from us and what we can bring to them. So very often, and my background in financial services goes back to 1988 when I started working in what was called National Mutual at the time in finance and actuarial roles. And I've had over the period from 1988 right through to the late 2000s a variety of different ways of engaging with audit and risk functions. And my observation would be traditional audit functions did potentially come from a place of more of a compliance. But to move to trusted advisor is very important to move beyond the compliance stage to move to a genuine business partner where through the relationship a value is created. The insight that the auditor has is extraordinary. The auditor's capacity to see different parts of the business and to bring those into a framework for one client to help them to see the impact that they have from what they're doing to help them is very, very powerful. And so I love what Jess is saying about running risk shops to explore and understand the needs of the client, because it's only through understanding the client that you can demonstrate to the client that you can add value through their context. Let's, Margaret Nichols raised the question before, how do you deal with someone who seems to take an instant dislike to you and it seems that nothing you can do to break this down? Margaret, I gave some cursory examples to that, which were around trying to ask that person questions, getting inside their mind, all those kind of things. That's very much, that's an inquiry approach. There's another approach that I think is really critical sometimes, and there are people who will find it very difficult to extend trust. So they might have had a bad experience with an audit in the past. It may not be in your company. It could have been in their previous organisation. It could have been in their personal life. And they might carry a perception, rightly or wrongly, which makes it very difficult for them to build trust. In that instance, the only one of the critical ways to build trust is how you show up. One of the expressions I have as a facilitator is my best intervention is always how I show up in the room. What does that mean? It means that if I'm expecting people to engage and be open and to listen, then I must also be open and listening. If I expect people to be transparent and honest with me, I must be transparent and honest with them. So one of the critical pieces, if you're having someone who's taking a dislike or not trusting, is you must act in a way which is highly trustworthy. You must act in a way where you're going to build their respect. If you can understand what's important to them, what respects them, that makes it much more able to do that. Wendy Preston's made a comment, in my entry meetings, I always ask if there's anything management would like us to consider in the audit. So again, that engaging in that partnership. Jocelyn Tan, what if it's a review into potential fraud restricts what you can discuss with the other individual? So when I talked before about our trust and discernment as a polarity, in the same way, transparency and confidentiality is a polarity. And I imagine as auditors you would appreciate this in a much more vivid and day-to-day way than I might. And when I say transparency and confidentiality is a polarity, what I mean is sometimes people in their mind say, well, I can either give them the information or I can't. When we have a polarity and we go one way or the other, we always sub-optimise the outcome. If we're completely transparent, then in a fraud case, then obviously there are going to be implications for people. If we're completely non-transparent, then it's very likely to reduce the layer of trust. So how do we be both transparent and maintain confidences at the same time? That's the critical aspect. If anyone shares information with me which is highly confidential to another party, I immediately reduce my layer of trust with that person, because the immediate question that goes through my mind is, gee, if that person's sharing this information with me, I wonder what they'd share with other people that I've talked to them about. So I do think that issue around what you're describing there, Jocelyn, in terms of potential fraud, is that, yes, it restricts what you can discuss with the individual. We have to open up that space of being as transparent as we can, and at the same time protecting individual confidences. Okay, let's move to the next part of the presentation. We've talked about trust. And trust is really the bedrock. It's absolutely the bedrock of building effective relationships with our clients. To go beyond trust is to build both our power and our influence. Now, when I talk about power, when Dave and I talk about power in the program, we're not talking about positional power, we are talking about personal power. What you can see on this slide is a split between positional and personal power. Positional power, what is internal audit's power in the organisation? That will be their status power, their hierarchy in the organisation, who they report through to, the role of the BACC, the role of the chief auditor. It will be about their brand power, the reputation of internal audit within the organisation. How well are they respected by the organisation? Does the organisation see them as a must-have because it's a compliance role versus a value add because it's a team that's partnering with the organisation? A third part of power, which comes with the position of internal audit, and it touches on Jocelyn's comment before about fraud, is resource power. Internal audit has access to very, very sensitive information. That is absolutely a source of power in the eyes of the client, and it can be a very vulnerable experience for someone else having your very personal or private information, which again comes back to the transparency versus confidentiality and the respectful use of that power. While these are all the positional powers of internal audit, there's also the personal power of every individual. And that to me is absolutely critical when we explore this a little bit further. When I think of personal power, a person who comes to my mind is a person in a team that I was running when I transitioned from finance roles in the mid-2000s into learning and development for my career. And I used to head up the learning and development for a company called AXA. And my role there was to roll out a leadership culture across the organisation. And that was around supporting the organisation to empower people, to allow people to make decisions, to really have the organisation move more rapidly and more effectively by people taking ownership for what they were doing. And one of the people in my team there was a very, very powerful person, not because of her role, but because of how she dealt with clients. And what I remember particularly was that she set impeccable expectations and impeccable standards. So if she had a commitment to a particular client, she would always meet that client at that time. So the trust was very high because of her reliability. But at the same time, what she did, and I call it engagingly assertive, her response would always be, when can I receive this by? And if the information wasn't at that time, she would follow them up very politely, very respectfully, very engagingly, but be very clear of the need to bring that in. So there was a sense of urgency in the request, there's a sense of clarity that she created with those people. I'm going to invite you just to reflect on a person who you see as powerful yet is not in a powerful organisational role. What makes them powerful? And Hussein has made a comment there. Connection within the team makes him or her powerful. So not only what you know, but who you know, how you connect with people, how you bring people along, how you engage with them. Great comment, Hussein. What other attributes do people have? Let's just spend a minute or two and see what other attributes people consider. Network and knowledge, absolutely. Being able to motivate people. Being able to actually understand what motivates people in the workforce. one of the things about motivation is it's very hard to motivate people unless you understand what is motivating to them. Everyone draws their motivation from different sources. So in terms of building trust and intimacy, that'll be critical in being able to motivate people. Knowledge in the industry and experience in the company. Ability to bring people together and influence strategic direction. Personality and affability. Confidence, belief in ourselves. Able to get things done. The executive assistant or secretary, they give you access to people and have knowledge of the area. So that's a very, very interesting one. There's, where does the executive assistant get their power from? The executive assistant normally gets their power through their position in the organisation. Then the assistant to someone else who's very powerful. And so their power is often given through the position, but when they give you access to that access is through the relationship that you have with them. Confidence is in your ability and ability to influence people. Okay, great. So let's have a exploration of some of the research around power and where the sources of personal power. And again, in people's responses here, many of these responses absolutely speak to the heart of these 2 points. The first point is informal authority, that is power through others. Typically, power through others comes in 2 sources. It comes firstly from the extent to which you get your power from your network within the organisation. Could be your network outside the organisation, it could be associates from elsewhere, but where you're able to very quickly be able to pull together info from different people. When I was working in the Philippines for AXA, I was the Chief Financial Officer there, and we had a very significant breach where there was a regulation in the Philippines where advisors could only be paid a maximum amount of commission. And it came to my attention that the advisors were being paid commission outside of the normal systems and above the minimum. So we were in breach of the legislation and we were doing it outside of the monetary systems that the organisation was controlling. I spoke to the Chief Auditor, who was the Regional Chief Auditor and who partnered with each of the CFOs across the region. He said to me, give me half a day. Half a day later he came back and he knew exactly what was happening. He was able to do that because he had a rich network of relationships across the business. He was able to have informal conversations with people, and he was able to be able to move people forward or to get information out through the relationships that he built. And that gets us to the second part of informal authority. It's not just the people that you know, the extent of your network, it's how you build influence with them. It's partly the trust that you build with them, but it's also how you come across, how motivating you are, how open you are, how interested you are in other people, how engaging you are, how clear you are in your expectations and intentions. All those things will influence. When we get to influence, in the last section today, we'll explore that in a little bit more depth. The second source of power, though, informal authority, is really power through others. It's your own personal power. And this means this is where you draw your resources from and your resources of what you've been able to do in the past, what is important to you, and how you come across when you're working with your clients. The sources of personal power, to me, come also from the choices that we make. It comes from how we choose to continue to grow and develop versus whether we find situations very difficult and we don't know how to face in and we may not move on them. So the sources of personal power is an absolutely critical attribute. Let's explore that a little bit more, and I'll just explain what I mean in a little bit more depth. In the Effective Auditor program, we often hear a complaint from auditors about their clients that when there is an audit issue, the client will say, it's not my fault. Does that ever happen with your clients? Looking in the chat box there to see if there's any responses. Yes. Yes, frequently, mostly. Once or twice? Yes, yes, often. Okay. And what are some of their responses? Some of the responses I hear are, it's another department's fault, or it's always been done like that, or it was a temp worker who came in, it's not my team. In other words, they lay blame, they justify, or they deny. In leadership terminology, this is called below-the-line behaviour. Okay? One of the other ones is they don't agree with the data. Okay? Some very, very famous cases there, which I won't go into today, where information came up. It was very clear there are issues, but senior executives or senior management chose to believe the managers in place rather than the people with the spreadsheet showing the problems with the data. So one of the things that Dave and I teach in the 2-day program is how do we focus our clients and our relationships with our clients above the line? How do we coach people gently towards that responsibility? How do we ask open-ended questions? And examples of that are, if someone, for example, said, well, look, I don't believe that the data is accurate that you're putting in front of me, then coaching towards responsibility might be, rather than blaming the data or denying that it's true, is to say, we have a challenge here. I respect that you don't trust that data. I'd like to understand from your perspective what it is that you don't trust that data. What other sources of data have you got? Because it may well be true. It may be that this source of data has some challenges in it. So rather than trying to defend my position, I'm opening to inviting that person to explain to me why they believe it to be true. By doing that, I'm coaching them from straight out denial towards giving more information and more of and being able to partner with them to actually see the solution. Another alternative might be, in that case, in the face that I have data which you don't agree with, how can we move forward on this? What other sources of data do you have that you believe is more reliable? And why is it that you believe this data may not be reliable? Help me to understand, because it's really important so that I can support you. So always trying at that point to move them towards responsibility and at the same time maintaining the relationship. One suggestion, that can they provide data to support their view that wasn't provided during the audit? Terrific. So it might be that additional data has come to light after the audit. How can we build that in? When someone goes on the offensive and says, look, you don't understand our business, then there are a number, again, of responses there, which might be, firstly, one of the expressions I use from my background, I've shared a little bit today about my background in financial services and how I moved into learning and development. What I haven't shared, in the 10-year period between that move, I did many, many personal development programs. And one of the pieces of personal development I did there was what was called neuro-linguistic programming. And one of the key themes there is about building rapport. And one of the building rapport pieces is, if you want to build rapport with someone, you need first to get inside their worldview, to understand where they're coming from, and that's called pacing. And only when you understand where they come from are they more likely to understand where you're coming from. Stephen Covey calls it seek first to understand, then to be understood. So in this instance, if they're saying that they don't agree with, they don't understand the business, my response might be, you know, you're right, you understand the business much better than I do. You work in the business every day. I really appreciate that you guys are the experts on the business. So that's pacing. I would then say, and at the same time, I have a role to support you, and we have some information here which seems to be inconsistent with an effectively run business. And I may not use those words, they might be a bit harsh, but it might be, we have information here which is inconsistent, and my support, given you're the business expert, I want to work with you to understand what it is that's causing this. And I can only do that by working with your people, because you are the business experts. So I'm reframing the conversation to acknowledge that their expertise, to acknowledge that, yes, they understand the business better than I do, but not to get into the defensive position of moving away from that. Thanks, Raj. I'm just reflecting on Margaret Nichols' a couple of thoughts through this. Was the info hidden from the audit, and if so, why? Secondly, was it not really part of the audit? So again, if information suddenly comes to light a little bit later on, why was that? A question of curiosity. How do we actually respond? Now, I've given some observations about clients that you have and how the clients may respond and sometimes be above and below the line. The reality is that it's not just the client, it's all of us. It's me from time to time, it's Dave from time to time, and it will be the audit function from time to time. That is the sting in the tail. As human beings, there are times that we drop into blame, justify and deny. Some of the comments that Dave and I hear in the audit program are that they're a difficult client. They don't like negative findings. They give bad feedback about the audit function, and they don't like the report recommendations. They never respond to the audit findings on time. Now, all of these things may be true, but if you're focusing on the problem rather than focusing on what you can do about it, it's very, very difficult to solve the problem. So the question that I always ask is, in the face of these things, how can you choose to respond? And once you ask, how can you choose to respond, it shifts the conversation from being about we can't do anything to what are our choices in the face of that. When we start shifting and seeing and exploring choices, that is where we draw our power from. And that is the link between this little unit here on responsibility and power. We draw our power by exploring those choices, by learning more through those choices, by practicing them, and by actually developing more capability. A little expression: no single drop of water thinks it is responsible for the flood. Yeah? Now, what that suggests is that even if you have a difficult relationship with a client, if you have a client who doesn't trust you, if you have a client that constantly provides information later, if you have a client who constantly goes over your head or does things, that may not be that you started that. But the problem is that once it occurs and you're part of that system, every part of the system is implicated. And implication doesn't mean that I started it, but it means that how I bring myself to it can make a difference to whether or not we get a resolution. So one mindset for responsibility, and a very powerful mindset, is the meaning of a communication is the response it receives. The meaning of a communication is the response it receives. What that suggests is that if someone doesn't like my audit report, or doesn't like how I've explained something, or doesn't like my style, then that response implicates me because of how I communicated it. And my responsibility then is to go back and explore what can I actually do differently. And I'm sure many people here have heard the definition of insanity. The definition of insanity is when something doesn't work, to try it again and again and again in the same way. So the idea here around this, the meaning of communication as a response you receive, is it opens up the possibility of how else can I communicate? What are the different possibilities? We won't have time to cover this today, but this is something we cover in more depth in the 2-day program. One other very powerful mindset I just want to explore before we get to the final part of today, which is about influence, is the, I'm very sorry, there's loud noises in the background there, so please ignore those, there's no such thing as failure, there's only feedback. What does that mean? There's no such thing as failure, there's only feedback. What it means is, if something doesn't go well, don't treat it as if it's a failure. Treat it as if it's a great learning opportunity. If a client engagement hasn't gone well, what can you learn from it? If a particular audit report was not received well, what can you learn from it? If whatever the scenario would be, if you treat everything as a learning opportunity, you always have an opportunity to grow. It's very hard to do that right in the heart of pieces. I always think that the only time I really fail is when I walk away from something and I give up. So in terms of building power, in terms of that responsibility, another lovely frame. And in terms of Margaret Nichols, so are you saying it's a mindset that one needs to implement? I'm saying it's important to keep it at top of mind. And by keeping it at top of mind, Margaret, and having it constantly there, it can remind us when we're facing into feedback that we don't like, when we're facing into things that we really don't want to receive, that it might actually be in there a kernel of opportunity for us to grow. I'm conscious that we're at 12:52, so I'm going to move through a little statement from Albus Dumbledore, a few people might know. It's not our abilities that show what we truly are, it is our choices. Very often there's an 80% rule for me, and that 80% rule is often in life, 80% of stuff is outside our control. And if we focus on that 80%, nothing will change. If we truly want change to happen, first we must change. So we need to focus on what is that 20% of things that is inside our control. And when we do that, that will make 80% of the difference. Let's go to influence, and then we'll have a short period of time where we can answer some other questions that have come up. And I noticed that Raj has asked John to share some information. Reflections on influence. I've covered seek first to understand, then to be understood, an expression from Stephen Covey. Another reflection on influence. We have one mouth and two ears. Use them in that proportion. What that means is that often it's very influential just to listen to people, get inside their perspectives before advocating our point of view. It can be a very, very powerful way of communicating. To me, listening builds trust. It builds that sense that I understand what that person has to offer is very important. And if I really try to understand them, they're much less likely to tell me that I don't understand their business. I might say to them, I don't understand your business, but gee, I want to. Can you help me understand more? In terms of influence, there's a book by a gentleman called Robert Cialdini, C-I-A-L-D-I-N-I, which is very famous, and he looked at the influence techniques that different people use. And he broke that into an acronym which is RASCALS, and they were reciprocity. If I give someone something for free, they're more likely to give me something back. An example was a life insurance agent who gave a person a free can of Coke, was 3 times as likely to sell a $1,000 policy as a life insurance agent who didn't. Authority. He had an example in his book of the white coat of authority. When someone wearing a white coat could ask people to do awful things, people were much more likely to do them than someone who was wearing a pair of jeans and a t-shirt. Think about what we talked about before about trust and power, the role of the authority and the position of the internal audit. Social acceptability. If things are inside what's expected in society, people are more likely to be influenced. Consistency. Saying the same thing again. Saying the same thing again. Saying the same thing again. Perhaps in a slightly different way and not exactly as I did then. But consistency means 2 or 3 or 4 different pieces of information that all go towards that same point of view. Alignment. That's about what's knowing important to the other person, knowing what their values are, and being able to respect them to be able to get to an outcome. Likeability. That links back to intimacy and the social and trust and the trust equation. And the last one is scarcity. Now hurry, quickly, write that down before it goes. That's right, you all know scarcity. You've seen those hurry last-minute sales that seem to go for months. So I've just put up some insights there around influence. I'd love to throw it open in the last 5 minutes that we have for any questions that people have. And whilst people are reflecting on questions, I might just come down to the John Bertaccio comment and leave it open for people to make comments as we go through. John has said, what you say about communication is true. Different people interpret things differently, and I have found a discussion about how things were worded in the report may help. And Raj has said, can you share that with us, John? So John, would love to hear your comment. My personal observation on that, and listening to how Dave shares, David Mallard in the course talks to that with participants, is he often said to him it was absolutely critical before the report went out finally that he shared it with the client, that he got the client's perspective on it. Sometimes people get very stuck on words, and it could be that you use a word which is not exactly what they would have said, and when they see that in the report, they don't feel the original thing is being honoured, their original intention's being honoured. So sometimes being able to check in with those nuances, what are the things that people can be fastidious or fussy about, which actually is really important to them, and it could be other pieces where there could be a slight misinterpretation or different context, and the context in which you're explaining it might be different to the context in which the reader may explore it. So how do you make sure the alignment of those two contexts and what other information they have? Deborah Marshall asked a question. Do you think that the influence of authority still holds with younger managers under 40? So my encouragement firstly is that I think the most critical part here is to reflect on not the management hat of audit, but the leadership hat of audit. To me, the management hat is the authority that we get through the position that we have in the organisation. The leadership hat is how we bring ourselves to that. And an example would be, someone once said to me, if you want to see the difference between leadership and management, put a person in a room who has the authority to make a decision with a group of people and see how they go about it. Now take away that person's authority to make that decision and see what they do. Okay? So when you take away that person's management authority, how do they influence the room? That's really at the heart of leadership. So I absolutely think that influence still holds under 40, but it's how that we do it. So a comment from Raj, which is altering audit reports is a slippery slope. Once you start to negotiate on findings, where do you stop? My response to that would be about materiality and about intention. And I hope it didn't come across that I was suggesting limiting the findings to have a favourable outcome for the client. That was never my intention. For me, what's really critical is the transparency and that the quality and integrity of the audit is upheld, but in a way where there are very small non-material things that make no difference to the findings, that make no difference to the outcome, that they are taken into account in a way that the client is engaged through that and it's a partnership. The second comment I would make is that to be open to the possibility that there is something that you've missed is an absolutely critical skill to have. If there is anyone here who is infallible and has never actually made a mistake before, then please leave now, because this is not the place for you. As human beings, we only have partial information, and it is time that we might have been absolutely accurate within one context, but we've missed that context. It could be that we've interpreted something through a lens where the client has other information that's valuable. So that'd be my perspective, and I think from what I can see, Karen writing there and Michael there also going along that same point. And Margaret's point is also include good findings. Okay, all the tests you tested, mention as well as those controls tested as being effective. So absolutely, there's pieces around feedback and research on feedback that say for people to truly receive feedback for improvement, they often need, and this is in management culture, they often need 6 pieces of positive feedback and constructive feedback for each piece of feedback for improvement. I would imagine that when you're auditing your clients, it's very mindful to think about how people receive info if everything they get is only around the deficits rather than also what is effective and also on how you actually build those relationships. So I'm conscious that it's 1:01 and we're due to finish at 1, so Linda, over to you.
No problems. Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you for a very insightful and colourful presentation there. A special thanks to our delegates today for all of your questions as well as your interaction today. As you guys have already taken the opportunity, but if anybody does have any last-minute questions, if you could pop it into the chat box now for us. However, if you don't have any last-minute questions and you are ready to leave us now, please click on the cross on the top right of your screen. As you exit, you'll be directed to a feedback form. The feedback form only takes about 30 seconds to complete. However, it's very beneficial for IIA, Andrew, as well as CPD Live. So we'd really appreciate if you guys could take the time to do this. Just having a quick look at the chat box. Oh, there's a lot of thank yous there, so thank you very much, everyone. A job well done there, Andrew. Okay, well, as you exit, I might just pop on some music. Are you ready to wrap up there? Sorry, Andrew?
Yes, I am.
All right, wonderful. Okay,
Thanks
well,
everyone
thank you.
for today.
Thank you very much for presenting, as well as our delegates there. I'm just going to pop on some music as you exit.
Okay.